Blood is thicker than water, but apparently it's not thicker than a country club membership. For years, my high society family treated my military service like a contagious disease, hiding me in the shadows. That is, until a classified national crisis literally crashed my father's ultra-exclusive black tie retirement gala. To understand how I ended up standing in a designer gown, surrounded by New York's billionaire elite, while actively coordinating a Tier 1 military extraction, you have to understand the Kensington family. My parents, Edwards and Victoria Kensington, are the kind of old money that doesn't just buy luxury, they buy legacies. My father built an empire in corporate acquisitions, ruthlessly gutting companies and selling them for parts, while my mother sat on the board of every prestigious charity and museum in Manhattan. In their world, your worth was determined by three things: your net worth, your zip code, and the name printed on your Ivy League diploma. Then there was me, Rachel. From the beginning, I was the odd one out. While my older sister Audrey spent her teenage years networking at debutante balls, and my younger brother Preston was groomed for Harvard Law, I was running track, reading military history, and volunteering. When it came time for college, Audrey went to Wharton, Preston went to Yale. I chose the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. The day I brought home my acceptance letter, the silence in our penthouse was deafening. My father didn't even look up from his Wall Street Journal. My mother simply sighed, rubbing her temples as if I had just announced I was joining a cult. "It's a phase," my mother told her friends at the country club, her voice dripping with forced casualness. "Rachel is doing a quirky character-building program. She'll get it out of her system, serve her mandatory 4 years, and then we'll send her to Columbia for her MBA." But I didn't get it out of my system. I found my calling. I thrived in the discipline, the purpose, and the absolute meritocracy of the Navy. I didn't just serve my 4 years. I made it my career. I became a cryptologic warfare officer. By the time I was 28, my aptitude for signals, intelligence, and real-time decryption had caught the attention of Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC. I was quietly attached to a specialized support element working directly with Navy SEALs, specifically DevGru. My days and nights were spent in windowless rooms or forward operating bases, wearing a headset, listening to the darkest, most dangerous corners of the world, keeping operators alive by breaking enemy communications in real time. My work was highly classified, meaning I couldn't tell my family what I actually did. Not that they asked. To them, my career was an act of embarrassment. When I was promoted to lieutenant, nobody from my family attended the pinning ceremony. They claimed there was an unavoidable conflict with a charity regatta in Newport. Whenever I did manage to come home for holidays, I was treated like a blue-collar distant relative. They introduced me to their elite friends with a stiff, "This is Rachel. She's in the Navy," followed by a swift change of subject. They assumed my life consisted of swabbing decks or answering phones on a rusty ship. The divide reached its breaking point with my father's 65th birthday and official retirement gala. It was to be the social event of the season, held at our sprawling oceanfront estate in the Hamptons. Senators, tech billionaires, and Wall Street titans were on the guest list. 2 weeks before the event, my mother called me. She didn't ask how I was, or if I was safe. She immediately launched into a set of strict conditions for my attendance. "Rachel, darling, your father insists the entire family be present for the photographers," she said, her tone clipping over the secure line I was taking the call on. "But please, let's be sensible. Do not wear one of those dreadful uniforms. We are projecting elegance, not. Whatever it is you do, buy something understated. Try not to bring up your work if people ask. We don't want to make the guests uncomfortable with talk of war or dirt." I swallowed the familiar lump of rejection in my throat. "I'll wear a dress, Mother. I won't embarrass you." "See that you don't," she replied, and hung up. I almost didn't go. But despite everything, a foolish, persistent part of me still craved my father's approval. I wanted to stand there as his daughter, hoping that just for one night, he might look at me with the same pride he reserved for Audrey and Preston. So, I pulled a massive favor with my commanding officer to get a 4 8-hour pass, flew commercial back to New York, bought a simple, elegant navy blue evening gown, and drove out to the Hamptons. I left my tactical gear behind, but there was one thing I could never leave: my classified secure comms device. It was a thick, heavy, heavily encrypted satellite pager phone hybrid that kept me tethered to JSOC command 24/7. As a Tier 1 intelligence asset, I was on continuous alert. If the device buzzed, it meant the world was catching fire. I slipped the heavy black device into my designer clutch, took a deep breath, and walked into the lion's den. The Kensington estate was transformed into something out of a modern Gatsby novel. Valets whisked away Lamborghinis and Bentleys at the gates. A 60-piece orchestra played classical renditions of pop songs on the manicured lawn. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets floated through the crowd carrying silver trays of beluga caviar and vintage champagne. The moment I stepped onto the terrace, the air felt suffocating. I spotted my family holding court near an ice sculpture of my father's company logo. Audrey was draped in diamonds, laughing loudly with a group of hedge fund wives. Her husband, Bryce, a man who had inherited a fortune and somehow believed he earned it, was holding a martini, gesturing grandly as he spoke. Preston was beside my father, schmoozing a sitting U.S. senator. I approached them, forcing a smile. "Happy birthday, Dad." My father paused, offering me a tight, obligatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Rachel, you made it. Good." He didn't offer a hug. He just turned back to the senator. "Senator, this is my youngest, Rachel." The senator smiled politely. "A pleasure. What do you do, Rachel? Are you at the firm with Preston?" Before I could answer, my mother materialized, gripping my upper arm with manicured nails that dug into my skin like talons. "Rachel is taking a gap decade in the armed forces." "Senator," she laughed, steering the conversation away. "She's very passionate about civil service. Now, have you tried the Wagyu?" I stepped back, feeling my chest tighten. "A gap decade." Bryce smirked, stepping over to me. "Still playing G. Joe, Rachel?" he asked, swirling his martini. "I was just telling the guys government work is such a dead end. I shorted a major defense contractor's stock today. The military is just a bloated bureaucracy of underachievers who couldn't hack it in the private sector. When are you going to give up the glorified mechanic gig and get a real job?" I looked at Bryce. My security clearance was so high that if I sneezed the wrong acronym, he would be detained by federal agents. I literally handled signals intelligence that kept the stock markets he played with from being cyber-nuked by foreign adversaries. But my training required silence. "I'm happy where I am, Bryce," I said quietly. "Right. Well, try not to bore the guests with stories about boot camp," he chuckled, walking away. When it was time for dinner, the true extent of my family's disdain was laid bare in the seating arrangement. The tables were arranged around a massive stage. Audrey and Preston were seated at table 1, right beside my parents, flanked by billionaires and politicians. I looked at my place card. Rachel Kensington Table 19. Table 19 was in the darkest corner of the massive tent, practically brushing against the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. I was seated with our disgraced, twice-divorced uncle who had a drinking problem, the estate manager's assistant, and a few random +1s who didn't speak English. I was literally seated with the help and the outcasts. I sat down, staring at the pristine white tablecloth. The humiliation burned in my chest. I had coordinated drone strikes. I had listened to the final, whispered words of operators surrounded by enemy fire, guiding them to safety in the dead of night. I commanded respect in rooms filled with stars and eagles, yet here, in my own family's home, I was nothing, a stain to be hidden away. As the multi-course dinner progressed, the clinking of crystal glasses signaled the speeches. My father took the stage, the spotlight reflecting off his silver hair. The crowd roared with applause. "Thank you," my father beamed, adjusting the microphone. "Looking out at all of you tonight, I am reminded of what it takes to build a legacy. It takes ruthlessness. Yes, it takes vision. But mostly, it takes a family." He gestured to table 1. I look at my daughter, Audrey, a brilliant mind in finance, a wonderful mother, a true reflection of the Kensington standard. Audrey beamed as the crowd applauded. "And my son, Preston." my father continued, his voice swelling with pride. Already making partner at his firm, a legal shark in the making. These two are my greatest achievements. They are the future of our name. He paused. He looked out over the crowd. He didn't even glance toward the back of the tent. To Audrey and Preston, and to all of you, cheers. Cheers. He didn't even mention me. I was completely, utterly erased. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over my heart. I reached for my water glass, my hand trembling slightly. I realized, with absolute clarity, that I was done. I was never going to win their love. And I was destroying my own soul, trying to earn it. I was about to stand up, grab my clutch, and quietly walk out of the estate forever. But before I could push my chair back, a sound broke my focus. Buzz, buzz, buzz. It wasn't a normal phone vibration. It was a heavy, mechanical grinding sound. A sound I hadn't heard in 6 months. It was coming from inside my clutch. My blood ran cold. I opened the clutch and pulled out the thick, black, secure device. The tiny screen was flashing a blinding red light. Flash override, critical. Authenticate, Kappa 9 Echo. A flash override isn't a simple emergency. It means a catastrophic, Tier 1 national security event is actively unfolding. I immediately typed in my biometric PIN and decryption sequence under the table, shielding the screen. A text block populated the screen. Sitrep. POTUS Motorcade compromised. Manhattan grid down. Hostile cyber hijack of secure comms. DevGru Squad 3 blind in sector. We need your encryption key to re-establish comms and guide POTUS exfil. You are the only asset with the cipher. Prepare for immediate extraction. The President of the United States was in New York for a UN summit. According to the message, his motorcade was under a coordinated cyber and physical threat. Local comms were jammed, and the SEAL team assigned to his counter-assault team was flying blind. Because I had written the specific rolling encryption algorithm they used, I was the only person who could manually override the jamming and reconnect their comms to the satellite. I didn't have time to process the family drama anymore. The switch flipped. I was no longer Rachel the disappointment. I was Lieutenant Kensington, Naval Intelligence. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the wooden floorboards. I needed to get to an open clearing for the exfil. I started power walking toward the exit of the tent, my eyes glued to the secure device as I typed lines of code to prep the handshake protocol. Rachel! A sharp voice cut through the ambient chatter. I looked up. My mother was blocking the exit, her face contorted in absolute fury. She had seen me stand up during the post-toast mingling. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so the nearby billionaires wouldn't hear. She grabbed my arm in a vice grip. "You are storming out? Are you throwing a tantrum because your father didn't mention you? You are already an embarrassment, Rachel. Do not make a scene." "Mother, let go of me," I said, my voice dead calm, devoid of any daughterly deference. "I have to leave, right now." "You are not going anywhere," she snarled, stepping closer. Audrey and Bryce had noticed the commotion and were walking over, smirking. "Is the little grunt upset?" Bryce mocked, loud enough for a few guests to turn their heads. "Going back to base to scrub toilets?" "Rachel, go back to your seat immediately," my mother commanded, her eyes blazing. "You will not ruin this night for us." "You don't understand," I said, my fingers flying over the device's keypad. "This is a matter of national security. Let me pass." Bryce burst out laughing. "National security? What, did the cafeteria run out of meatloaf?" I opened my mouth to tell him to back the hell off, but I didn't have to, because at that exact moment, the crystal chandeliers above us began to shake. The low, rhythmic thumping of classical music was suddenly drowned out by a sound that shook the very foundations of the estate. The wine in the glasses began to ripple. The guests stopped talking, looking around in confusion. Thwack, 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 thwack. It was the unmistakable, deafening roar of military-grade rotary blades. And they were right on top of us. The noise grew from a dull, rhythmic thumping to a deafening, chest-rattling roar. The massive canvas walls of the multi-million-dollar event tent violently whipped back and forth, snapping against their steel moorings. The classical orchestra screeched to a chaotic halt as a cellist's sheet music blew frantically into the terrified crowd. Women in haute couture shrieked, clutching their diamond necklaces and shielding their perfect blowouts from the sudden, aggressive wind. Men who controlled global hedge funds, corporate media conglomerates, and political action committees cowered behind their pristine tables, dropping their crystal glasses. Through the translucent ceiling of the massive tent, I could see the dark, aggressive silhouettes descending. Not one, but two MH-60M Black Hawk helicopters, painted in radar-absorbent flat black, were touching down directly on my father's prized, manicured grand lawn. The downdraft was catastrophic. The massive ice sculpture of the Kensington corporate logo violently shattered, sending chunks of ice rocketing across the dance floor. Waiters dropped silver trays of champagne, the glass exploding over the teak wood. My mother screamed, dropping her talon-like grip on my arm to cover her ears against the engine whine. "Edwards! Edwards! What in the world is happening?" Before my father could even stagger forward to shield her, the tent flaps were violently ripped open. 5 men stepped through the tier, completely shattering the illusion of my family's untouchable, insulated world. They weren't local police. They weren't private security. They were United States Navy SEALs attached to the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. They were kitted out in full battle-rattle, quad-node night vision goggles pushed up on their fast helmets, suppressed HK-416 assault rifles gripped firmly at the low-ready, heavily armored plate carriers, and faces obscured by balaclavas and tactical communication headsets. The room of billionaires froze in absolute, terrified silence. The aura these operators projected was primal, violent, and utterly uncompromising. It was the harsh, brutal reality of the world breaking into my family's bubble of superficial wealth. The lead operator, a giant of a man with the call sign Reaper stitched in subdued lettering on his chest rig, scanned the terrified crowd, his eyes locked onto me instantly. He didn't see a disgraced daughter in a blue evening gown. He saw his command's only lifeline. He strode directly toward me, his heavy combat boots crunching over the broken crystal on the floor. His squad followed, forming a tight, impenetrable diamond perimeter around us. Their weapons pointed down, but their eyes scanning the room with lethal efficiency. "Lieutenant Kensington," the lead operator said, his voice a deep, gravelly bark that carried easily over the fading whine of the helicopter rotors. "Transport is wheels down. We need you on comms. Right now. The grid is dark, and command has lost the package." "I have the decrypt sequence ready, Chief," I answered, my voice steady, shifting instantly out of the role of the shunned daughter and into operational mode. "Get me a hard line into the bird's satellite uplink the second we are aboard." "Yes, ma'am, let's move." My family was paralyzed. Bryce, whose liquid courage hadn't entirely worn off, stepped forward, his face flushed red with a mix of fear and indignation. "Hey, what the hell is going on here?" Bryce demanded, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of alpha male posturing. "You can't just crash a private event. Do you know who my father-in-law is? I'll have all of your badges for this." The SEAL didn't even look at Bryce. He didn't blink. He simply extended a massive gloved hand and shoved Bryce backward by his sternum. He did it with such effortless, kinetic force that Bryce flew backward into a cocktail table, collapsing into a heap of expensive linen, shrimp cocktail, and shattered plates. "Stay down, civilian," the operator growled, not breaking his stride. My father finally found his voice, stepping in front of my mother, his face a mask of absolute outrage. "I demand to know the meaning of this. Rachel, who are these men? I am calling the governor this instant." The operator finally turned his gaze to my father. The look in the SEAL's eyes was colder than the Arctic. "Sir, I don't care if you call the Pope. I am operating under Title 10 authority, and your daughter is currently the most vital intelligence asset on the eastern seaboard. Now step out of my way before I put you in zip ties and leave you on your lawn." My father's jaw dropped. The great Edwards Kensington, the ruthless corporate shark who made CEOs tremble, was completely neutralized by a man who couldn't care less about his bank account or his country club status. Audrey stared at me from across the ruined table, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sheer terror. Rachel, what do you actually do? I didn't answer her. I didn't owe them an explanation. Not anymore. I looked at my mother, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water, her strict rules about projecting elegance completely obliterated by the dirt, wind, and chaos swirling around us. Enjoy the party, I said simply. I turned and walked out of the torn tent, the SEAL squad falling into step around me, forming a moving wall of tactical armor. We marched across the ruined lawn, the rotor wash whipping my elegant evening gown around my legs. A crew chief reached down from the open door of the Black Hawk, grabbing my hand and hauling me up into the cabin. As we lifted off, the nose of the chopper dipping down to accelerate into the night sky, I looked down one last time. My family was standing on the ruined lawn, staring up at the sky, looking smaller, weaker, and more insignificant than they ever had in my entire life. The inside of the Black Hawk was a sensory overload of noise, vibration, and red tactical lighting. The crew chief immediately handed me a heavy aviation headset and a hardened, ruggedized laptop that was wired directly into the chopper's encrypted satellite array. "Lieutenant, you're plugged in," the chief yelled over the intercom. "JSOC command is on the line." I pulled the headset over my ears and slammed the laptop open, my fingers flying across the illuminated keyboard. "This is Lieutenant Kensington. I have the con. Talk to me." "Kensington, thank God," the frantic voice of the Joint Task Force commander echoed in my ears. Hostile actors used a localized EMP and a zero-day exploit to fry the Secret Service's comms in Lower Manhattan. The President's Motorcade is pinned down on FDR Drive. Our counter-assault team is blind and deaf, and local law enforcement is locked out of the grid. We need you to manually rewrite the rolling cipher and force a handshake through the static. "Send me the telemetry data from the Overwatch drone," I commanded, staring at the lines of corrupted code cascading down my screen. For the next 20 minutes, as the helicopter tore through the airspace above Long Island at 160 knots, I was completely locked in. This was the wild, untamed frontier of cyber warfare, a high-stakes survival scenario where one wrong keystroke meant a compromised head of state. I aggressively bypassed the jammed frequencies, ripping through layers of malicious code. I found the back door I had secretly built into the architecture months ago for exactly this kind of worst-case scenario. "I have the back door. Uploading the new cipher now," I shouted. I hit the execute command, watching the progress bar race across the screen. "Broadcast in 3, 2, 1, mark." The laptop screen flared a brilliant green. A heavy, agonizing static filled the comms channel, followed by a sharp click. Then, a calm, deeply relieved voice came through the headset. "Command, this is Viper 1. Comms are restored. We have positive control of the package. Pushing through the blockade now. We are moving." A collective breath I didn't know I was holding escaped my lungs. The SEALs in the back of the chopper, who had been listening to the tactical feed, gave me a series of firm nods and silent fist bumps. "Outstanding work, Lieutenant," the commander said over the radio, the tension leaving his voice. "You just saved the Republic a massive headache. Bring her home, boys." We banked hard toward the naval base. I closed the laptop, staring out the open door of the chopper at the glittering skyline of Manhattan in the distance. My pulse was pounding, but for the first time in my life, my mind was perfectly clear. The aftermath was swift. By Monday morning, classified briefings were held in secure rooms at the Pentagon. Officially, the press was told there was a minor traffic incident involving the President's Motorcade due to a civilian grid malfunction. Unofficially, I was awarded the Defense Meritorious Service Medal in a closed-door ceremony. But the real shockwave hit my family. 3 days after the gala, my phone rang. It was my father. For the first time in 28 years, he was the one initiating the call. "Rachel," he said, his voice lacking its usual booming, arrogant authority. We were visited by some men in suits yesterday. Federal agents. They had us sign non-disclosure agreements about what happened at the party. "Standard procedure," I replied coldly, sitting at my desk on base. "Rachel, I don't understand." "The senator we were sitting with. He called me today. He said there are rumors in Washington that you're heavily involved with the Joint Chiefs. He asked if I could set up a lunch with you." My father's tone shifted. suddenly taking on that familiar, transactional greed. This could be huge for Kensington Acquisitions, Rachel. The defense contracts alone. We need to get you back to New York. We can host a proper dinner. Just the family and a few key politicians. You should be at table 1. I laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was a laugh of genuine, unadulterated amusement. For my entire life, I had contorted myself to fit into their mold. I had accepted table 19. I had swallowed the insults from Bryce. I had endured the silent, cutting shame from my mother. All because I believed that family meant unconditional support. But they didn't want me. They wanted the access I now represented. They wanted to wear my sudden, undeniable value like a new designer watch. They wanted to weaponize the very career they had mercilessly mocked. "Dad," I said, leaning back in my chair, "do you remember where I sat at your gala?" There was a long pause on the line. "Rachel, that was a misunderstanding with the event planners." "No, it wasn't. It was exactly where you thought I belonged," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a low, steady cadence. "You spent my entire life being ashamed of my service. You treated my dedication to this country like a disease. But the moment men with guns pull me out of your party because the commander-in-chief needs my brain to survive, suddenly I'm a Kensington again." "You are my daughter," he snapped, a hint of his old temper flaring. "You owe this family." "I owe you nothing," I said, cutting him off with the precision of a scalpel. "The people I owe are the men and women who wear this uniform. They know my worth. They respect my mind." "You just respect. Leverage." "Rachel, don't do this. You're making a mistake. You can't turn your back on your family." "I'm not turning my back, Dad," I replied, staring at the military crest on my wall. "I'm just moving forward. Don't call this number again. It's a secure line." I hung up the phone. I blocked his number, followed by my mother's, Audrey's, and Preston's. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I felt liberated. I had finally broken the cipher of my own life. Blood might be thicker than water, but the bonds forged in the fire of duty, honor, and mutual respect, those are unbreakable. I was a cryptologic warfare officer for the United States Navy, and I was finally done deciphering the lies of people who were never truly on my team. Sometimes, the people who share your DNA are the first ones to tear you down. But finding your true purpose will always reveal who actually belongs in your corner. If Rachel's ultimate karmic revenge and her high-stakes military rescue kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this story with anyone who needs a reminder to know their worth, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible, drama-filled real-life stories.